Here we are again. Diablo IV. Episode 22. 2 and 2 equal 4. Okay, story.
Your silence on the damsel!
I'll miss that cat.
I want eyes on the road waste. Sentries at the walls. The sinners will come running. Let none through.
Lorath and Donan have gone to Caldeum. The knights march on the city. They felt it best to follow. But I wanted to wait for you. Can I ask you something?
No,
Something personal.
definitely not.
You know you can.
Do you ever feel like nothing you do matters?
More than I'd like to admit. They call me hero. But underneath, I'm still the same person I always was. Powerful, sure. But flawed, too. I try. Yet my best isn't enough. Not for Yorin, nor your mother.
Does it get any easier?
It can. With a good ally.
Thank you for being honest. It helps, knowing I'm not alone. We should go. I'll find the others in Caldeum.
I heard her praying, just like us.
How many cultists have they killed? How many innocents?
The rain of blood. Intriguing. Another piece of the prophecy?
Die now, you're stuck on the tree with Elias for eternity. Nobody wants that.
I was fine on my own.
At last, the knights are sacking the place.
Is Lilith here?
Yes. Just as the tree said. The rain, the Hellspawn, all spew from the Hellgates underneath the city palace. She's opened the way. If she consumes her father's essence, Sanctuary is lost. We can't let that happen.
These corpses, displayed so proudly. There's nothing of the light in this.
The display is the point. They mean to make an example.
He's here, in the city.
Damn it. He's still the best shot as an ally we have.
This rain of blood. The sign we've waited for. Call the weak.
They mention the Lord of Hatred.
Mephisto.
What? That can't be. Elias owned this cult, and Lilith owned him.
Let me do the talking.
The time of prophecy has come, knights. Lilith flees to the gate to hell. I will slay her in that cesspit she calls home, and open the way to the heavens. All is as fate decreed. A spear of light, piercing hatred's heart. You who die in battle today, die heaven-bound. Rally the troops at the palace. We march on hell!
And after that, your plan?
The Horadrim. Always chasing after the battles of your betters. But the angels don't need you.
The stone, Don. We don't need the bloody angels either.
The hubris. You boast of a mere fragment of what this once was. The World Stone. Debased to the hands of fools. Lilith dies by my blade. Prophecy has foretold it.
Same as before. This changes nothing.
How can you say this changes nothing? Our one potential ally just ran off with our one weapon. What's your plan now?
To stop Lilith and damn the cost. Inarius is mad with pride. We can't rely on him.
Stone or no, there is someone who might stand a chance against it.
You bested Astaroth and Andariel both. If we can find that stone, you might be our next best weapon.
Father, deliver us!
Donan, you've come back to us, and not alone. Blessed be the light. The Father will deliver us, together.
He seized our soul stone.
His is the will of the light.
You still believe that?
How can you doubt us? After everything we've done for you and Yorin. At least, he doesn't have to see you like this. Stand down, brethren.
Easy.
Sin reaps consequence. I have faith the Father acted righteously.
We want to stop Lilith. Same as you.
Unbelievable.
Inarius awaits us at the mouth to hell. Unnecessary. The father will handle Lilith.
But your army, your people, they need help.
What?
As do we. We'll move faster together.
Lorath, the voice of reason. Rare pleasure. Very well. You may accompany us to the gate. Hark, knights! The day of prophecy is upon us! The Father will slay Lilith in hell and lift his faithful up to heaven! To the palace!
That. The ground shook.
Ambush! From the rooftops!
Go! We'll handle things here. Must be something under there.
Reverend Mother, the gate is barred against us!
Hold our position.
Lorath, a word, please. We can't trust her.
Yes, but they've an army, and we share a goal.
For now.
Above the gate. Looks like a winch. I'll handle it.
Whatever you did, it worked.
Now they're quick.
The chain's gone slack. It must have snapped. I need to find another way to do this. Fresh kills, but already maggoty. Something speeds to get ready. What was that? What are you? Low on essence. Low on essence. Lesser evils beyond Andario. Could that thing have been one? The Herodrum should be at the palace. If they made it.
Thank heavens you're here. I convinced them not to go without you.
You should have kept your temper with Prava.
I know. But you shouldn't have thrown away the stone, either.
We have a heading. Mephisto shelters in the Cathedral of Hatred. Across the Sea of Fire, Astaroth's domain. I'd wager that's why Lilith freed him in Skosglen. That's where we'll find her.
And what then? We don't have the stone.
Enough, Donan!
Then it's up to me to stop her, right?
You've been hounding me about this and that non-stop. Can you drop it for once?
It's not about me hounding you. It's...
Enough! You're both so smart usually.
Usually.
Not today. Yes, the stone is gone. Instead of arguing, let's do something about it. If Inarius has it, let's take it back.
It is the only way to guarantee Lilith's defeat.
No, not Lilith. You're all wrong about that. The stone should be saved for Mephisto, her maker, the prime evil. You know his powers of manipulation. His hatred has already poisoned us. Even Lilith fears him. Why don't you?
Are you done?
I can sense your fear, Father.
Well, what did you see?
She went through the doorway.
Whether we use you or the stone, we have to stop her. We follow her into hatred itself. It will sour our hearts even more, turn us against each other. Let's remember why we're here. Together. Everything feels wrong here. The air, the ground at my feet.
Mortals were not meant to tread this realm.
The sooner we can find Lilith and get out, the better.
I cannot carry more.
Uh-oh, time to go turn in some shit.
Anything else?
Praise the Father.
Let's see. What aspects do I want of my gear? I have to find that damn video again. Okay, well, there seems to be 2 different versions here I'm looking at. Might as well pull them up and have you guys watch them with me.
Aspect we're going to be...
Let's see, first one is called Strongest Necromancer Build. Sorry, Strongest Necro build in the game right now.
Hey guys, welcome.
And the other one called The Best Diablo IV Build.
I've been doing a ton of Uber Lilith carries on my absolutely busted Necromancer recently over on Twitch, so if you guys are interested in getting the sick mount that comes with it and the title Lilith's Doom, make sure to check me out over on Twitch. I'll be doing this probably for the next couple of days, and I probably won't be doing it for too much longer, so definitely check me out on Twitch if you're interested. But as you can see in the gameplay, Necromancer's damage is by far and away the highest damage in the entire game, and it is unbelievably strong. It's very difficult to tell how much damage is actually being done here because Lilith's like nameplate is in the way, so I tried to get a different angle. This isn't ideal for like speed killing here or anything, and you could probably get a better angle, but if we slow it down a little bit, you can see that each individual splinter can do up to like 16 million per hit, and each bone spear that we do not only does initial damage but also hits 5 bone splinters at the same time. You can actually get these to do up to 20 million per hit, but the damage is pretty variable in this game, and unfortunately I don't have a very good clip of that. But even if we just say each splinter is only doing 10 million, every bone spear is going to do 5 splinters, and if you're positioning properly, almost all 5 of those are going to hit, and that is easily 50 million damage per second. Obviously though, this build isn't just for Uber Lilith. Build is unbelievably strong for literally just playing the game. When I go to do Lilith, I literally swap like just a couple things. If you guys would be interested in like just a guide on Corpse Tendrils also is going to stun enemies and slow enemies, which we will use to get some resources. And the build, I don't have a very good clip of that, but even if we on how to do Lilith and stuff like that, leave it down in the comments and I'll be doing that. But if there's not too much interest, because I imagine most of you guys aren't level 100, then I probably won't do that. But I mean, as you can see in the gameplay, and I'll show more gameplay at the end, Necromancer is just unbelievably ridiculous. You just walk around hitting for 10 million, constantly one-shotting the entire map. You walk into a boss room and you just one-tap it, and the build is incredibly like not gear reliant. You can set it up very, very easily, but the more gear that you get, it scales out of control. At this point, my Necromancer is pretty much perfected. Incredibly excited to show you guys how ridiculously powerful this class really can be. But let's just get into things. This is kind of going to be a long one because I want to be very diligent with you guys. But again, for more information, definitely check out the website if you want to be able to easily reference all of these skills, the Paragon board, the priority list for gear, all of the different legendary aspect options, etc. But let's get into it. So first off, we're going to talk about the skills here. Surprisingly, you actually can swap around your skills a pretty good bit. There isn't really much that is mandatory with this build. Sorry if I'm going to go over a lot of things. I want you guys to have all the options, but honestly, it's preference. Usually I don't say it's preference because a lot of things are somewhat mandatory in builds, but for this build particularly, you really only need Bone Spear, Blood Mist, and Corpse Tendrils. Bone Spear, obviously, because this is a Bone Spear build, and it does unbelievable damage, right? And then Corpse Tendrils because of one of our legendaries being the Corpse Tendril Grasping Veins one, where we get 30% crit chance whenever we pop Corpse Tendrils, but we also deal 90% increased crit damage to enemies damaged by the Corpse Tendrils. Talking more about this later, Corpse Tendrils is also fantastic because it is our only source of getting blood orbs on a non-blood build. at least as far as I'm aware, and it just works perfectly for the build. So this is actually going to allow us to get Fortify by just slapping in one glyph, which is massively going to increase our survivability without really having to lose any damage. Corpse Tendrils also is going to stun enemies and slow enemies, which we will use to get some resource, which we'll talk about. But it also just makes playing the build significantly easier because you can play around this to either play very aggressively or defensively. You just spawn one Corpse Tendril, and it literally pixel pulls mobs from like off screen a lot of the times, and then it stuns them for a 3 second stun, and you do basically double damage to them while they're stunned. It makes playing the game super easy. It is a crazy amount of fun. So outside of that, Blood Mist is really just good for the immunity because you don't have really any unstoppable with this build, and obviously we need Bone Spear. Everything else is just supplemental to the build. So Corpse Explosion we're literally just using so that we can get a little bit of extra damage through our Paragon board and our skill tree, but it's incredibly optional. I don't use Bone Splinters anymore because there's literally no need for it. If you have the build set up properly, Essence is no longer an issue, and I have a section talking about Essence at the end of the video to go over everything with you guys. But briefly, there's also different ways to get Essence through both of our curse skills, which I highly recommend using. Iron Maiden is very good, not only for giving you guaranteed Essence if you just use it on enemies, 5 Essence per enemy. A lot of times you'll Corpse Tendril in like 10 guys, and then you'll pop down an Iron Maiden, boom, that's 50 Essence insta, right? And then you're also going to heal off of it. Necromancer has kind of a healing problem where you don't just have an inherent way to heal, so Iron Maiden really helps with that. The other option is Decrepify. Decrepify is good because it makes enemies deal 20% less damage to you, so massive survivability option. It also slows enemies, which counts as a crowd control for our Umbral Ring, so that actually gives us Essence pretty much the same way that Iron Maiden does. It's like 1 less, but essentially the same thing. But you also get cooldown reduction in the skill tree. And then there is Bone Prison. Previously I was using Bone Prison, but I think that it slowed the build down. The only reason I was using it was actually for the Fortify. I'll just show you guys in the skill tree. Bone Prison has Fortify, but the problem with the Fortify from Bone Prison, it is of your base life and not your maximum life. So this is only 217% HP. So I would have to Bone Prison like 30 guys, basically, to be able to actually get a full Fortify bar just from Bone Prison. And I realized I had enough Fortify as it is, just with my Corpse Tendrils. So that's why I stopped playing with Bone Prison. And then we have Bone Storm. Bone Storm I really don't think is all that necessary, but it's very nice for giving you the damage reduction, and it's also very nice for giving you on-demand 20% crit chance. Usually with this build, if you have it perfectly set up, you will have well over 100% crit chance, which obviously is the cap. If your build isn't really all that great, Bone Storm is fantastic for supplemental crit chance, but the main reason I use it is against suppressor mobs. This build has a very hard time fighting suppressor mobs because your splinters don't work anymore, so you'll run out of essence very quickly on those guys, and then as a result you're going to lose some crit chance because you get crit chance based on your essence. So Bone Storm I really just use as like, oh crap, there's an elite, or there's a boss that I want to kill, or there's a suppressor mob. Feel free to play around with like pretty much any combination of these, but my personal favorite way to play with the build is to use just Bone Spear with Blood Mist, Corpse Explosion for the extra damage, Corpse Tendrils for the extra damage, obviously, and then I personally prefer to use Decrepify over Iron Maiden for the survivability and for the cooldown reduction, so that I get more uptime on my Bone Storm, and I get more uptime on being able to just spam Corpse Tendrils. But I very often swap with Iron Maiden, and it takes like 3 seconds to swap it, and I just like using this for like blind burrows and stuff when there's enemies that are like constantly poisoning you. Let's get into the skill tree here. There's a couple different things you can do in here as well. Again, this will all be on the website. So only 2 points into Bone Splinters. If you're still using Bone Splinters for the essence, you want to slap on Acolytes, but you really do not need this. I'd only use this like under level like 60 maybe. It's really unnecessary. And then we get 3 points into Unliving and 3 into Imperfectly Balanced for damage. 3 into Hued Flesh is very good against bosses and if you're doing like Uber Lilith, but it is pretty much entirely unnecessary for just generally playing in Nightmare Dungeons because you're going to kill stuff and get corpses anyways, and you don't really need corpses all that much. Then we're going to max out Bone Splinter or Bone Spear. You want to take Paranormal. You do not need the vulnerable enemies that are like constantly poisoning you. Let's get into the skill tree here. There's a couple different things you can do in here as well. Again, this will all be on the website. So only 2 points into Bone Splinters. If you're still using Bone Splinters for the essence, you want to slap on Acolytes, but you really do not need this. I'd only use this like under level like 60 maybe. It's really unnecessary. And then we get 3 points into Unliving and 3 into Imperfectly Balanced for damage. 3 into Hued Flesh is very good against bosses and if you're doing like Uber Lilith, but it is pretty much entirely unnecessary for just generally playing in Nightmare Dungeons because you're going to kill stuff and get corpses anyways, and you don't really need corpses all that much. Then we're going to max out Bone Splinter, or Bone Spear. You want to take Paranormal. You do not need the Vulnerable because I'm pretty sure Bone Splinters is bugged. Don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that the legendary aspect is not supposed to make the first enemy hits vulnerable, but it does. It makes them instantaneously vulnerable, where it's supposed to only make the piercing effect and the splinters apply vulnerable, so you no longer need vulnerable from Supernatural, and you just go into Paranormal, which makes it to where if you crit, which you always do, you're going to get an extra 2 bone shards, and our bone shards are the splinters, which deal 225% bonus damage of our Bone Spear, so... yeah, I don't even know what to say there. That's why we're able to hit for, 15, 16 million. And we also get 5% crit chance. Alright, and then we get Blood Mist here. You could go into Blood Mist Fortify, but I really don't think that it is worth it. You have to like build into this, and you have enough Fortify as it is, and you don't really want to spend the skill points there. And then we go 1 into Corpse Explosion. Again, Corpse Explosion is optional here, and then you go into Grim Harvest, and then just 3 into Fueled by Death. I'm literally just doing this for the 9% additional damage here. If you really don't like managing corpses and having to press a Corpse Explosion every like 6 seconds, just take it off and you can just go into like Bone Prison, or you could grab another curse, or you could literally just reallocate the points anywhere you want. Corpse Explosion is nice when you're really early on into the build to just give you guaranteed essence, so you could put more points into Grim Harvest and just take it out of Death's Embrace, and then you could have 6 essence per corpse you spawn, or per corpse you actually explode with Corpse Explosion. Really helpful early on into the build, but I'll teach you guys how to have infinite essence pretty soon, so you really shouldn't need it, which is why I don't have the points in there anymore. And again, Bone Prison is okay for Fortify, but it's base life, so it's only really good early on. The second that you're like level 100 or even like level 60 and you have a bunch of extra HP, Fortify from Bone Prison really starts to fall off. Then we have 3 points into Death's Reach for just 12% increased damage. And then Death's Embrace is very optional. I'm doing this for the survivability because Necro has a survivability issue, not really a damage issue. So I'm just getting this for a little bit less damage taken. And you could decide to put this into Amplified Damage instead because we are using a curse here. And then I just went into Iron Maiden for the heal, but like I said, most of the time I like to go into Decrepify with Enhanced, and then I go into Abhorrent for the cooldown reduction here, which actually is pretty good, especially when you pair it with Corpse Tendrils. Corpse Tendrils we put a few points into. I put 4 because you want the cooldown to be around 7 seconds or so, because our Legendary gives us crit chance for 6 seconds when we cast it, and being able to cast this is just very nice, so you want to have a relatively low cooldown. And then we go into the slow, obviously, and then the Blood Orb. The Blood Orb paired with one of our glyphs, I'll talk about the Paragon later, but paired with just this glyph, we're able to get pretty much permanent Fortify uptime because you suck in 10 guys, get 7% of max HP, but you can actually increase your Fortify generation up to 10%, literally for free. So you suck in 10 guys, boom, you have 100% Fortify, boom, you just get a bunch of damage reduction. So that is fantastic for us, and you don't have to really lose any damage to spec into that. I'm a big fan. And then I go 3 into Serration. Serration paired with Ossified Essence is pretty much the reason this build is able to scale so heavily out of control. You're able to get a crazy amount of maximum essence. As you can see right now, I have literally the max. I have 274 because I have a potion on. If you minus 50 the potion, that's 224. But then you actually have a a node that gives you 24%. Sorry, it gives you 24 extra essence. So you just get an unbelievable amount of essence, literally upwards of 250. But if you have the thing on, you get nearly 300 essence. And any essence that we have above 50, that's literally 250% extra damage when we are at max essence, and a crazy amount of crit chance. So that is pretty much the reason that the build is so good. And then we get Compound Fracture for just literally 15% more damage because we're critting all the time. And then Avulsion is what you want to get on your necklace. Your Bone skill does 36% increased crit damage to vulnerable enemies. We're pretty much critting all of the time. Technically speaking, Compound Fracture is slightly better against bosses because it is active nearly instantly, and it is not reliant on you landing a crit, but you have nearly 100% crit chance, so Avulsion is better for general play, and once the build is perfectly set up, they're pretty interchangeable, but you have higher uptime on Avulsion. And then we go 3 into Inspiring Leader, literally just for the attack speed. This is pretty optional, but it is nice. And then Standalone for 18% DR, which is pretty huge, and then 3 into Memento Mori to increase our sacrifice bonuses, which I'll show you guys. And then we have Bone Storm. Honestly, this is one of the skills that you could very easily swap out if you have a preference, if you wanted to play with, you know, all of the curse skills, if you want to play with Corpse Explosion and with Bone Prison, or you still want to use like Bone Splinters. You can do pretty much any combination of the skills that I've mentioned at this point, and you'll be perfectly fine. Sorry if that was a bit long-winded. I do apologize. I just really want to be thorough with you guys because there's so many options and there's a lot to talk about with this build. When it comes into our sacrifices, we just want to sacrifice our minions for 5% extra crit chance, and remember, this is being buffed by an additional 60% through our Memento Mori. Then we also get additional Essence, which is buffed by 60% again, and then Golem for the 30% increased crit damage, and again, we crit pretty much all the time, so that is a ridiculous amount of extra damage there. Now let's get into the legendaries, and then I'll get into the Paragon board. Again, remember, everything will be over on the website, a list of all the legendaries, where you want to put them, and all the priority lists on the gear. So you want to be using a two-handed with this weapon, because you want to put the splintering aspect on your two-hander, which is going to make your bone splinters deal 225% increased damage, which is where the majority of our damage comes from. It's not from the initial hit of our bone spear, it is from our splinter. This is why it's important to position properly and make sure enemies get hit by the splinters, and this is why when you fight a suppressor mob, you hate your life because the splinters are just disappearing, okay? You definitely want a two-hander. Talk more about that later. And then on the amulet, you have two options. Personally, I think that Grasping Veins is just always going to be your best bet for general play. The other option would be putting
quite some time before I get gear. Not even close to getting gear. All right, so here's the other one.
Welcome back, and today we're going to go over the Bone Necro. This build absolutely surprised me, and now it's one of my favorite builds in the game. The single target damage it puts out is second to none. If you sometimes wish you didn't have to cast an ability twice to end the enemy, well, this is the build for you. It will clear elites, it'll clear bosses, and it'll even clear the Butcher in the blink of an eye. So let's dive into the Bone Crow, and yes, this build is 100% endgame viable. As always, I'm going to start with the skills, then I'm going to jump into the rotation, the gear, the aspects, and everything else you need to know for the build. Also, there's going to be a written guide linked down in the description below so that you can use that to put the build together once you understand it. The nice thing about this build is it's incredibly easy to play. It's not complicated, it's very intuitive. We're going to click our Bone Spear, things are going to die. There's a couple of other things at play here that we'll talk about as we go over the skills, but it's actually a really easy build to play. Maybe one of the easiest I've played so far this season, just because of how simple and straightforward and intuitive it is. So let's dive in. The first thing we're going to grab is Bone Splinters. Bone Splinters is just our basic attack. It's mostly just here to help us generate resources when we need to accelerate that process. We're going to grab Enhanced Bone Splinter, which is going to cause it to fire 2 additional projectiles if it's cast over 50 essence. Next, for our core ability, what we're going to grab is Bone Spear. Bone Spear is going to be our bread and butter. This is putting out all of our damage, and it's going to put out a lot of damage. This is the thing that you'll see pass through a boss and kill it. And if it doesn't kill it on the way through, it'll probably kill it when it bounces and comes back. Same with elites, same with the Butcher, right? This thing is going to melt enemies, and it's absolutely hilarious when it does. And you'll really see the difference between the damage you're putting out and the damage the other people are putting out when you are at public events, and you'll see 3 or 4 people beating on an elite, and you'll walk up and delete it with a single shot. And if you're the first one to the next elite, it'll die before anybody else gets there. This happens all the time when I'm running around legions. I walk up, I cast my Bone Spear once, and it just one-shots the elite that the whole group was about to fight. Sometimes we need a quick break from the dark and gritty world using a so let's get back and we're going to get as many additional points from our gear as we can. We're going to take Enhanced Bone Spear, of course. This is going to make it break into 3 shards when it's destroyed, dealing more damage with each one. So like when it hits the wall and bounces back, or when it hits at the end of its line and then it bounces back, right? These are doing more damage. And then we're going to take Supernatural Bone Spear. This is going to make the first enemy it hits vulnerable. We're going to have an aspect on our gear that makes the rest of the enemies it hits vulnerable. So all the enemies are going to be vulnerable, and we are going to stack extra vulnerable damage like crazy. So that's part of why we are going to melt enemies the way that we do. We're also going to grab Hued Flesh. This is going to be used for one of our aspects. It's going to be used for crowd controlling mobs, right? This is going to feel real good. It's basically going to create corpses while we're fighting enemies. And in the event that we're fighting a boss, let's say you get to the end of a dungeon and there's just one boss standing there and it's you and him and there's no corpses around, well, this is going to make sure that you're able to make a corpse so that you can fire off some of your other abilities that rely on corpses that really amplify our damage. Now we have Unliving Energy, another passive we're going to take. This is going to increase our max essence by 9. This is really important. This build wants as much essence as possible because of our key passive, which says the more essence we have, the more damage we do. So we want to have as much essence as possible at all times. And this is 9 extra essence. We're also going to get extra essence on our gear when we can. We're also going to get it on our Paragon board when we can. And that's going to be part of why we do so much damage with this build. We're going to grab Imperfectly Balanced. This is going to make our core skills cost 9 more essence, but do 15% more damage. So that's a good ratio of damage to cost right there. We're getting more damage than it's costing us, which is good, right? So we're taking that, we're maxing it out. Then we're going to come down here to our Corpse Macabre skills, and we're just going to take Blood Mist. And we're only going to put 1 point in Blood Mist. We don't care about the passives. This is just our CC break if we're in a pinch, if we get crowd controlled, if we get surrounded by enemies, and we need a way to escape that, right? Every build needs 1 crowd control break, or you're just asking to die, especially in Diablo 4. So this is that ability. This is our get out of jail free card when we need it. And we're also going to take Grim Harvest. We're only going to take 1 point of Grim Harvest right now because we're not actually consuming a ton of corpses in quick succession by any means. We're actually only using them as we absolutely need to because Bone Spear is doing all of our damage. Feel free while you're leveling up to use Corpse Explosion with your Bone Spear and put 3 points into this just while you're leveling. 3 points into Grim Harvest and a bunch of points into your Corpse Explosion. And for a long time, Corpse Explosion will carry during the leveling process. You'll know when it stops carrying. You'll start blowing up corpses and it's not really killing anything anymore like it used to, like one-shot everything, right? That's when it's time to spec back out a Corpse Explosion if you decided to use it for a little bit while leveling up. Next, we have Curse skills. We're going to be using Iron Maiden, which might sound a little bit weird, but it's actually for the fact that we don't actually care what the ability does. We're only using it for the first passive here. No longer costs essence. Instead, we gain 5 essence for every enemy cursed. Does not work with enemies who are already cursed. So as we're running through a dungeon, if we're not at full mana before we cast our Bone Spear, what we'll do is we will throw Iron Maiden on the group of enemies. There's 5, 10 enemies standing there, and boom, that's going to fill our mana back up, or our essence as it's called on the Necro, which, as you now know, makes us do more damage, right? If we cast our ability at full essence, it does way more damage than if we cast our ability at low essence, right? So you always want to be riding like the full, right? You want to be riding full of essence. You don't want to be running around on empty because then your skills are hitting like wet noodles compared to when you're full on essence. So it's better to cast less. It's better to be full before you engage your enemy than to be empty by a long shot. The next passive is kind of optional. It just says that heals for 5% of your max life when an enemy dies while afflicted with Iron Maiden. Well, we're going to be afflicting pretty much all the enemies with this. So this is a constant 5% heal coming in whenever we're killing enemies. It's a nice heal. It's a nice supplemental heal for free. You know, the 5% is a lot of health coming back in. We're killing these enemies. And since we're casting it on them anyway, we might as well get this nice passive healing out of it. Works out really well. We're going to take the passive Amplify Damage, which says you deal 9% increased damage to cursed enemies. Since we're cursing our enemies, why not take this free 9% damage? We're also going to take Death's Reach. You deal 12% increased damage to distant enemies. Well, you know, our Bone Spear travels a long way, and a lot of times we're going to throw it into a pack of mobs well before we get to them because the Necro is kind of a glass cannon, especially in the early levels. You'll feel like you're a little bit of a glass cannon. There's a lot of things we're going to do to fix that so that you're one tanky son of a gun by the end of it. But until then, you know, we're going to try to keep our distance from the enemies as best we can. In the next set of Corpse and Macabre skills, we're going to grab Corpse Tendrils. And Corpse Tendrils is a nice one to get extra points in from gear because it's going to cut the cooldown down. Right now, Corpse Tendrils on this build is down to a 7.5 second cooldown, which means we can cast this every 7.5 seconds. It's going to crowd control the entire room. We're also going to take Serration. This says our bone skills have a 0.9% increased critical strike chance for each 10 essence we have upon cast. We're always going to have a ton of essence when we cast. So this is going to be a solid increase in crit chance. We're going to take Compound Fracture. After critically striking 10 times with bone skills, our bone skills are going to deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. Well, mine is 30%. Normally it'll be 15% without the extra points. I've got some extra points for this on my amulet, which feels pretty good. And then finally we have Evulsion. Our bone skills are going to deal 18% increased critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. Just one of many vulnerable amplifications that we're going to be rocking here. Next, finally, our ultimate skills. We're going to take Bone Storm. We're going to take this for a couple of reasons. One, this is a Bone Crow. We're using a bone for our basic attack. We're using bone for our core ability, and we're using a bone for our ultimate, right? So we're boning everything with this build. And part of the reason we're taking this is our damage reduction is increased by 15% while this is active. So it's making us considerably more tanky and much. So we're basically
So let's see, did he say?
Mine is 30%. Normally, our bone skills are going to deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. Well, mine is 30% normal skills. Corpse tendrils is a nice one to get extra points in from gear because it's going to cut the cooldown down. Right now, corpse tendrils on this build is down to a 7.5 second cooldown, which means we can cast this every 7.5 seconds. It's going to crowd control the entire room. We're also going to take Serration. This says our bone skills have a 0.9% increase. So we're going to take Bone Storm. Bone for our core ability, and we're using a bone for our ultimate, right? So we're boning everything with this build. And part of the reason we're taking this is our damage reduction is increased by 15% while this is active. So it's making us considerably more tanky and much more tanky when we throw on one of the aspects that we're going to combine with this ability, which is going to give us massive shields constantly while it's active. So the way it turns out is while our Bone Storm's up, we're basically unkillable. But Bone Storm isn't just defensive though. It's also doing damage to the enemies around us, and it's giving us critical strike chance increase by 20% while it's active. So it's a really nice, well-rounded ultimate because it's giving us defense and it's giving us offense. So if we pop this when we're going to town on a boss or a pack of elites, and not only are we less likely to die, but we are also doing more damage. And the way we're getting those passives for Bone Storm is from these two passives that are attached to it. Prime Bone Storm is giving us the 15% damage reduction, and Supreme Bone Storm is giving us the critical strike chance. And then last but not least is Ossified Essence. Now this is an incredibly powerful key passive. It says our bone skills are dealing 1% increased damage for each point of essence we have above 50 upon cast. Right now we have 153 essence. We could certainly have more if we had slightly better rolls on some of our gear, but that means our skills are doing over 100% increased damage. So they are doing double damage, right? From the essence that we have when we cast the ability, nothing else. Before anything else is factored, they're just doubled in damage. So Ossified Essence is going to be doing a lot of work for us. Now that covers the abilities and the passives. Let's talk about the rotation real quick. What you're going to do is you're going to oftentimes fire a bone spear through the pack of enemies. This is going to create at least one corpse. Then you're going to corpse tendril that pack of enemies if the whole thing isn't dead already. By the way, a lot of times the rotation ends there. One bone spear, everything's dead, right? And you keep running to the next thing. But if it's an especially thick pack, or for some reason it doesn't all die, or you need the crowd control or the extra damage, after that you'll follow with a corpse tendril. This will group everything that's remaining up into a nice pack for you, and this is going to increase your damage thanks to an aspect. Our damage is going to be greatly amplified after using corpse tendrils on a corpse. Now that they're tightly packed up, we're going to use bone spear. If we get to the next pack and we're not full on essence, that's when we'll drop the Iron Maiden on them. You can also drop the Iron Maiden on them if you are full on essence, because it does give you that 9% increased damage, so feel free to do that if you want to. That leaves Blood Mist and Bone Storm. Basically, you're going to say Bone Storm for especially hairy looking fights. You walk up and you see maybe 3 elites standing there, or an elite with a bubble that forces you to get up close to it. That's a great time to pop your Bone Storm and then run in there and engage that elite with your Bone Storm. This is going to make it so that you can't die, right? This is your, I'm basically unkillable for the next 10 seconds. The ability does have a 1 minute cooldown or so, you know, you're going to want to use this strategically when you need to, when things are getting hairy, or when you have an especially difficult fight ahead of you and you need the increased damage mitigation and the increased damage. Blood Mist, of course, you're just going to save this, you get stunned, boom, now you get out of that stun, right? Because the Necro is especially limited on their mobility abilities, and you'll definitely notice that on this Necro, especially if you've come from another class that zips around a little bit faster with some mobility abilities. You'll feel a little bit vulnerable out there with no mobility abilities, but you do have Blood Mist to help you if you do get caught. Now let's talk about the gear and the aspects that we're going to take. So for the helmet, you could use Deathless Visage. This is a unique, but this is by no means required for this build. In fact, if I was actually fighting a really hard boss, I would take this off and put on something that was leaning more into defenses. This is going to cause your Bone Spear to leave a trail of explosions behind it, so it'll zip by and then there'll be these little orbs that explode after a short while. If something does survive the Bone Spear, a lot of times the trail of echoes this leaves behind will finish them off. For the chest piece, I'm running the Bone Storm aspect. This is going to cause our Bone Storm to give us a 5% shield, right? 5% of our health as a shield every time it hits the enemy for 10 seconds. So this is part of why when our Bone Shield's up and active and hitting things, we're unkillable, right? The Bone Storm is making us take less damage, and this is giving us a shield equal to 5% of our health for every enemy that it damages. That's a lot of shields, and that's a lot of not dying that we're doing there. On the gloves, I've got the Ossified Essence Key passive aspect, which is going to make it so that our ossified essence increases the critical strike damage of our skills by 1% per essence above 50 up to 40%. So we basically always have an extra 40% crit damage with this passive. When the Bone Spear crits, it crits hard. As you'll notice, standing here unbuffed right now, I have a 42% crit chance and I have a 272% crit damage. That's not including the critical strike damage with bone ability specifically, which is adding another 82% on top of that 272%, right? Much damage happening here. Our pants we're using very defensively again, because remember, the Necro is very glass cannony. You want to have at least 3 defensive aspects on. So here we've got, you gain increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal damage of any form to an enemy. This is a must-have aspect. In my opinion, there is no build that shouldn't use this aspect in the game right now. Armor is so valuable as a defensive mechanic, and this gives you a ton of armor. Put this on every build. And we're going to use it on the Necro for the same reason. On the boots, we're using Become Injured while crowd controlled grants you unstoppable for 4 seconds. Like I mentioned earlier, Necro kind of lacks on mobility, and so eventually you're going to get caught and you're going to get stunned, and your blood mist does have a 20-second cooldown. So in an especially hairy dungeon, sometimes there's a lot of mobs with CC, and this is just automatically going to pop you out of that CC if you become injured, aka if you go below 35% health. It's going to free you from that, and this will be a lifesaver. This will save your life, I guarantee it. The only other thing you could use here is something a little bit more mobility based, where if you crit, you get increased move speed for 1 second, right? Which is nice, but it's not a lot of increased move speed. It doesn't last very long, so it's nice to have, but this will save your life. So you can use either one. It's up to you. On the weapon, we're going to be using the Bone Spear aspect. This says that our Bone Spear is going to make enemies hit after the first enemy vulnerable for 3 to 5 seconds, and it's going to cause our Bone Spear to do an increased 215% damage to vulnerable enemies. So everything's going to be vulnerable. The passive is making the first enemy vulnerable. This aspect is making every enemy after the first one vulnerable. So everything's vulnerable, and everything's taking 215% increased damage. That is a lot of increased vulnerable damage. 215% from this one item alone. Massive, absolutely massive. On the rings, I went with Lucky Hit, giving us a chance to generate essence when we hit vulnerable enemies. Everything we hit is vulnerable, and so we end up triggering this more often than we would expect, which feels great because essence sustain, not running out of essence, in other words, is going to be one of the harder parts of this build to get used to until you kind of get into the ebb and flow and you get into the habit of casting your Iron Maiden on the packs of enemies as you run up to them before you kill them, not after, and you get into that Paragon board where we have some points that give us essence back whenever we kill an enemy, which feels really good when we get to that point. But until we get to that point, essence sustain can be a little bit tough. On the other ring, we're going to use the increased critical strike chance for 6 seconds when we cast Corpse Tendrils. So whenever we cast our Corpse Tendrils, we get extra crit chance for 6 seconds, and we deal 45% bonus crit on a crowd control the entire.
So I'm following this build guide here, and it seems to have more points than I even have points available for. I'm not seeing it. So, got 2 in the Bone Splinters, and 1 advanced. 5 Bone Spear, got that. Paranormal, okay. Living Energy, got that. Imperfectly Balanced, okay. They say No Hued Flesh, so that's 3 points. Blood Mist 1, okay. Corpse Explosion 1. Grim Harvest and Fueled by Death 3, okay. They do not have the Radius Corpse Explosion or that, so that's 2 points, so that's 5. They've got Decrepify, 2 enhancements, so that brings that back down to 2. They've got 3 points in Death's Reach, and I've only got 1. And then they've got Death's Embrace, which is a 3. Don't have that at all. Then they've got 3 points in Corpse Tendrils. I've only got 1. They've got Enhanced Corpse Tendrils. Okay, I've got that. And Bladed Corpse Tendrils. Got that. They do not have Necrotic Carapace. I kind of need that. Got those 3 at 3. Okay. Got Standalone and Memento Mori. Okay. They've got 3 points in Inspiring Leader, which I don't have. And they've got Bone Storm with the 2 add-ons. Okay. And then they've got Ossified Essence. So where the hell are they getting all of these extra points that I'm not using? Do I get more points as I level up? After level 50? Care about the attack speed. Definitely need Fortify. Like to have that, but that's not as important as Fortify. I would like to have that. Still need the Fortify more. Alright, screw it. Let's try out what we have right now. Okay, so I'm going to have less corpses, but I should be doing a lot more damage. Yeah, those blood orbs don't seem to be doing anything. What the hell do blood orbs do? So they heal you 15% of your health, okay. And I am dropping blood orbs from what? Course tendons. And casting course tendons in that last lobby. So I think if I take the imprint off of this and put it on the yellow ones, that they become legendary at the higher level. If I'm not mistaken.
I need more time.
Why do they keep getting knocked away from the corpse tip?
I'm not ready yet.
Only light must remain.
Is there anything we can do for that knight?
No. His mind is shattered.
Hellfire. To keep us out, or to keep someone in?
We'll know soon. Stand back, and I'll dispel the flames. Tani Sabdaileki. Demons!
Help us fight them off!
More time.
Definitely need more damage reduction.
This is where the proper battle was fought.
Fodder for a broken angel's ambitions. Keep moving.
Does my bone spirit do physical damage?
The forge is hot.
I know it's bone damage, but is it physical bone damage? It's not like magical damage. Screw it. Swap that out. Now I should get the skull back when I salvage.
What do you need? You can take what's left.
Okay, I did.
Sins beget sins as men beget men. Terror begets hate as hate begets destruction. Destruction begets terror as terror begets hate as hate begets destruction.
There's something underneath her. I know that glow. It's the Soul Stone.
No, the battle is not over. Their father is hunting Lilith. In the spire, across this infernal wasteland, salvation is coming.
Not for these knights you led to hell. Not for you either.
Brother.
You're just a tool of someone who doesn't give a damn about any of us. And a thief. You had the stone the whole time we were helping you in Chaldeum, didn't you?
Inarius entrusted it to me, and... Wait. You took it? Insolent heretic! Servants of darkness! You...
Game connection lost. Fucking piece of shit. Can't even play the solo parts of the game without an internet connection with their servers. So if there's a problem with their servers, you're not allowed to play the game that you bought. Fucking Christ. Alright, I'll end this episode here. I'll be back soon with another one.